So first of all, like thanks for having me here, DevFest Sri Lanka. I hope like you'll be learning a lot from these series of events and workshops on different tracks. Like whether you're on track A or track C. Hope you'll find the videos or the workshops going to be helpful in whatever areas you're interested in learning. So in this workshop or in this presentation, we're going to discuss how you can use the concept of CI/CD in terms of like automating your workflows for Flutter. At the same time, how you can use tools like Fastlane and Semaphore for you to be able to host it and automate it in the cloud. And we'll not be discussing in detail how these tools compare to their alternatives, because otherwise we'll spend a lot of time comparing the benchmarks of it. But rather, I'll teach you how to use it. And if you have the project, you want to experiment with it, like, feel free to try it and experience it for yourself, how awesome those tools are. And yeah, I'm not affiliated with Semaphore. And I'm a user of it, and I think it's a good time to introduce a tool like Semaphore as an alternative to existing tools like GitHub Actions and Bitrise. But it's still up to you how your teams are currently structuring or managing your project. But currently, I'm working at a fintech startup based in the US, focused on investments, Flutter and Dart GD, and currently creating experiences by organizing meetups and events at Flutter Philippines. And just to circle back, the topic is Flutter CI/CD, and Flutter is actually a multi-platform. Flutter is a toolkit for building apps for multiple platforms, but in this talk, we're first just going to try and limit the context. No, we'll try to limit the context in Flutter for mobile. Otherwise, there will be a lot of combination of workflows, possible workflows that can be integrated to your Flutter app. So let's just focus first on mobile and what is the actual challenge, or what is one of the challenges that you might be encountering with building or deploying mobile apps. So I think there's been a lot of challenges building mobile apps, but one that I can think of in relation to CI/CD is that mistakes are hard to revert for mobile apps. So try to think of it. In the context of web, if there's an issue with a component, with a feature that's not working, deploying those features or fixes for those features is quite easy. It's not because that fix is actually easy, but it's rather the deployment part is easy because it doesn't have to go through a series of review process. You own the domain, right? So, for example, there's a bug on a specific button in the website. You can just deploy the fix for it. But on mobile, it's a different story. We have a different deployment process, which you will see later in a few. That's in what makes mistakes hard to revert in mobile app deployment. So the first one is that I can think of why it's difficult for mobile release to handle mobile releases is that review process takes time, and it takes time because it takes actual people. At least for Apple, there's actual review testers that reviews the build of your app, if it's functional, if it's UI intuitive, if it's something that on par with their standards, similar with Google Play. And again, this is something not commonly done for web. This is mostly done for Android and iOS because they own the platform where those apps are running from, Android and iOS for Apple. And worst feeling is if you get rejected, because you'll have to start again. If there's a bug found by the Apple reviewer, you'll have to fix those bugs again, submit those app again for review. Even worse, if the bugs or if the build was actually shipped without a good series of testing, build checks, there might be a series of bugs, right, that comes out from your app if they ever get deployed to the public. And for every new build, again, you have to submit. Okay, for every new build, you have to submit again the app for review. So that again takes time. So the cycle repeats. And one of our goals here is to understand how CI/CD can actually complement the waiting time, the release process, and the manual process that it entails for deploying iOS and Android apps for Flutter. And one of the top features or top things in mind that you should have as a team is your goal is to ship features, not just to build them. So without the features getting in the hands of the users, there's no value add there. The true value add if the features gets released to the hands of the users. So an overview of an app deployment process. Let's try to frame the challenges that we faced earlier, like the mistakes are hard to revert. So again, SDLC or software development life cycle is a lot to swallow. Let's just focus on the app deployment part. So at least for the development, this is where chaos, things like bug fixes or bugs are introduced. We pass on it to integration, where we submit a pull request, meaning developers that have finished their feature or bug fixes is now ready for integrating their app to the code base. And last but not the least is the deployment part, in which developers will either have to create an artifact or submit the app for release. So that's kind of like the high-level overview, but let's see what actually happens under the hood. So at least for integration, there are a lot of things that can be added here from what I've shown you. There's more to it, like from code static analysis to testing to building. There could be more. Like you can add screenshots, golden snapshots testing for Flutter, and for deployment, there's more to it as well. It's more than getting the version, creating the build. Maybe you want to have automatic changelog, and the list goes on. But at least this is what a typical app deployment process looks like. And the cycle repeats. Integration phase, deployment phase, in which I specify that every time you try to release, if it gets rejected, you have to repeat the cycle again, because you'll either have to cherry pick a fix or remove that specific commit that introduced the bug. So that's a difficult task to make, doing cherry picking. So you'll really have to be careful in that one. Now, these processes can be done manually, no doubt. Now, like this can be done. Sorry, like my mouse is not moving. All right. Now, these processes can be done without using a CI/CD. Like CI means continuous integration, CD means continuous deployment, and for sure this can be done manually. But there's a lot of stuff going in here, and if you try to frame it within, for example, you have 5 developers, 1 PM, 1 QA. There's just a lot of manual process involved if each of the developer has to do or individually run code static analysis, testing, building. And most especially for building, because the philosophy, it works on my machine, it's not something that you guys want. You want to be the reason why a build is not working on another device. So really, manual process of doing all of this deployment process is that might introduce some factoring the human error, and like at least having the machine do it for us also like alleviates us from doing the ad hoc stuff, and removes all the time, like that. Instead of us trying to focus on doing this manually, we can focus on building features. Again, with us shipping features, the true value is delivered to the users. So at least that's for CI/CD, kind of like an overview. Why is it important for us to automate all the tedious tasks, and and why is it really important for us to focus on building features rather than doing everything manually if we could otherwise automate it. So building workflows with Semaphore. This is an interesting topic. There's been a lot of tools out there for Flutter that allows you to build apps for deploy apps for using different CI/CD tools like GitHub Actions, Bitrise. But at least for this case, let's just focus on Semaphore. And Complementing Semaphore, we have Fastlane. It's an open source tool that simplifies the process for you to deploy iOS and Android apps. So with Fastlane, it has tools that are pre-built. It also has plugins with some of the services like Firebase, app distribution, which we'll be using later, and Slack. If you want to send notifications, there's already a plugin for that one. And really, it's an open source, so you can contribute as well on creating a plugin or submitting a fix for Fastlane. At least with Semaphore, it's a fast hosted CI/CD service, and similar to GitHub Action, it's on the cloud. But you can also, it also support for auto scaling, meaning you can run multiple parallel jobs, and you can ensure that Semaphore will handle the load for you instead of worrying on infrastructure and DevOps stuff that you would rather otherwise spend on building features. And last but not least, important thing to note here is that we're releasing right now on Firebase app distribution. We're not doing test flight in Google Play, but rather Firebase app distribution, because this is the fastest way I could demonstrate continuous deployment without the extra stuff for code signing, release SDK, key store, things like that. But at least in a nutshell, you get the context how to use Semaphore on automating your CI/CD and making sure that you are preventing and mitigating the mistakes that can happen without automation and machine doing it for us. So high-level overview of what Firebase app distribution looks like. This is the dashboard. There's a series of, there's a tab for releases, which contains a series of releases that you have. Testers, in which you can add different tester groups, whether it's alpha, internal, you can name it whatever you want. And next interesting thing is the visual builder for Semaphore. So from experience, there's been a lot of tools out there, and at least Semaphore has one of the, at least the best workflow builder, the way I see it. And we'll actually try it now. But just to give you an overview, this is what it looks like in creating the pipeline. And it's very intuitive. It tells you what each element represents. And it's actually a visual builder rather than a series of steps that you have to follow that other tools out there has. And instead of you trying to actually edit the YAML file, you can edit it directly in this tool, which looks great. Because for someone, at least for me, I have experience editing YAML files, but for someone who's just starting, it might be a little bit intimidating. So this is what the workflow that we're trying to achieve. Again, this is visual. So this is Semaphore's visual builder. And what it looks like in a nutshell after setting up all the stuff here is something like this. So we have the pipeline, in which it contains a series of blocks, and each block has a series of tasks that can run in parallel. Later on, we'll see this in action, how this actually is being run in parallel. And after all of these tasks or blocks have been successfully finished, we have this concept of promotions. Now, think of this one as the initial pipeline as checking or continuous integration, checking whether your app is stable, because you have test, you have static code analysis, which ensures that your code is app to standard with the style guide of your app team. And promotions is focused on deployment or a series of another pipeline. At least in this case, we're just focused on deployment, but it can also be a similar pipeline that does a different thing. So we'll see them in action right now. And the first step that we want to do here is, all right, live coding is for us to create a new Flutter project. So create a new Flutter project. Hopefully you still remember how to create a new Flutter project. And this is an example of it. Flutter create. This is just a project name. This is org. I customize it so that we won't change it later on manually. Okay, and let's just open the code. All right. So we'll probably not run the app right now. Later on, we'll try it if you have time. But this is just a simple counter app, and as you can tell from the code, this is the default template. You know, like you try to run Flutter create. This is what the this is what the Flutter create template does for you. So there are additional templates out there, but the counter app is the most basic one. And our the next step after creating a new Flutter project is for us to set up the Firebase project. So this is where the builds are going to be deployed. So let's say DevFest AL, so that we feel that we're actually part of the event. So if you want to join the project, feel free to follow along, create your own Firebase and Flutter project. And we're building everything from scratch, which is a good thing. So meaning you don't have to, set up your existing project later on if you want to follow it. But I'll probably provide the source code for this one. All right, that's our new Firebase project. And one thing that we have to do here is go over app distribution. Okay, app distribution, and click Android. So right now we're deploying on Android. And we have here the package name. So the package name that we're using is, let me see, I think we have used, all right, we are using this one. And Android. Right. You can skip this one. If you're using Firebase services like FCM, feel free to download it. But if you're not using any of those, using just the app distribution, you are not required to download this one. Skip. Now we have the app distribution setup, or at least the project setup. We can now choose Android. Get started. So again, Firebase app distribution, this is where your builds will be set up. Let's create a new group, alpha. Add a tester. That's me. And the group is alpha. You can also create several groups like internal. Right now, let's just try to deploy it on alpha. Releases are empty because we haven't released an APK yet. Again, this is the manual process. Like without having to automate this with Fastlane and Semaphore, you'll either have to create the artifact one by one and upload it individually here. So let's try now. If you want to do it, Flutter build APK release. Right now, I'm just building the APK file. So what we're doing here is uploading the build without CI/CD and uploading the build without automation. So let's just wait for it to finish. Let me know if you have questions. I can also answer it. Okay, it's just running. Let's just wait for it. All right, so the build is out. If you want to open this one, open. Now the APK is here. And if you want to upload the APK, we can browse from desktop. Now that's manually uploading the APK. And I think if we have a simple app or a small number of users, that's doable. But imagine if you have 1,000 or hundreds of thousands of users, you can't just do this process manually, like selecting a tester, for every change, that really takes time. Okay, so that's manual. We have released the app, woohoo! But it's currently manual. Our goal here is to migrate that specific step that we did from building the app to deploying it using Semaphore. And the next step after setting up the Firebase is setting up Fastlane. So let's do Fastlane for Android, Fastlane init. So the first step that you want to do is Fastlane init. So it's like something like this, Fastlane init. And the package name, Guzman, Semaphore. Hope we get this right. Skip this one. No metadata because we're just creating the project now. So let's see if this passed through. Press enter, enter. All right. Now the files from the Fastlane is going to be generated under the Android folder because this is Fastlane for Android, but we can also do one for iOS, but yeah, so we have limited amount of time. We can just focus on one platform. Let's see. Next thing that we want to add here is the plugin. So you can type Fastlane, add plugin, Firebase app distribution, press enter. All right, just press yes for modifying gem file. And this should install the Firebase app distribution plugin. And this is how you will be using it. And we'll try to discuss what is the composition of the fast file. All right, so this is the composition of the fast file by default, but we will be replacing this with a specific code. So I'm pasting the code here. Okay, saving it. And this is the plugin that we have installed, the Firebase app distribution. And with Fastlane, there's just a few concepts that you have to understand how you can create a lane. So the platform, very straightforward. This is whether iOS, Android, and other platforms that Fastlane supports. Description, what it does. The lane is probably the thing that you're going to touch a lot. So you'll either have one lane for testing, one lane for deployment. But at least in this case, we're just using Fastlane or Fastfile for deployment to Firebase app distribution. We'll do the testing in Semaphore by running as Flutter test command. So in the Firebase app distribution, plugin, let's call the groups, which is alpha. That's the group that we've created here. And let's just delete this build, I guess, so that later on we'll see that we have submitted a new one. And the CLI token is something that we have to generate using Firebase login CI. So it's important that you have Firebase installed for your terminal. Okay, let's see. Just allow Firebase. So it's already logged in. And now we have this auth token or CLI token. This is supposed to be a secret, not something that you should put in a secret variable. But yeah, we can just add in here directly so we can test it out. So app ID is something that is going to be found here. Project settings in app ID. All right. Now it works, right? We now have Fastlane. Should we move straight right with Semaphore? Well, before we do that, let's just try running first this lane. So if you try to see here line 5, the name is deploy. To call that deploy lane, you can use the command Fastlane space deploy. And again, this is already doing the deployment part, but it's not yet the entire automated CI/CD. It's just manually you're just manually calling the script to do it for you. So releases. Let's go back to app distribution. It's uploading the APK. It depends how fast your internet is. Okay, it's uploaded. You should be able to see some this kind of like results here. For a moment. All right, so now it's uploaded. So we just uploaded it around 6:41, 6:42 now. And that's Fastlane. It simplifies, instead of you trying to manually upload this build to, on your own, building your own plugin. No, with Fastlane, it has a wide community of developers that allows, that builds plugins like this. At least it's coming from official Google team as well. And that's for Fastlane. Now we're moving into Semaphore. So let's just first commit the changes here. Git init, git add, full commit, DevFest KL, private, git remote, add origin. All right. Now we are using DevFest KL. So if you try to push it, nothing will happen here because, again, the CI/CD is not yet set up. It's just a project. 36 seconds ago. And with Semaphore, you can visit them on 𝗙𝗶𝘂𝘵.com. And again, Semaphore is a hosted CI/CD. It's on cloud. You don't have to set up any DevOps or infrastructure on your end. You just have to use it. And for example, this is the homepage. And it's already integrated with your GitHub account. And if you can also create your new account like classic login, but I'm using GitHub auth, so that if I try to create a new project, it will automatically search for the project that we're doing right now. So DevFest KL is the project. And if I try to click this one, click choose. So everything that we'll be doing here is visual. You will not be touching an actual YAML file, so don't be intimidated by the UI. It's very intuitive. Continue to workflow setup. I don't have anyone working with me on the talk, so let's just try to customize. All right, so this is Semaphore. It's very simple. The UI is clean. But I really want you guys to experience it firsthand. So I encourage you to follow along so that after this talk, you can build your own pipeline. So there's concepts here that we'll probably have to, at least a high level, because we still have a couple minutes. So high level pipeline, this contains all, again, the blocks of job, the blocks of our series of blocks, that makes a end-to-end pipeline. So at least with the first pipeline, we'll name it integration pipeline, continuous integration pipeline. And the first block, so in continuous integration pipeline, what we want here is to use Docker container. And I think I have it. Android. We're using the image. We're using the image from the Semaphore CI's Docker repository as this one. So you can use different machine types depending on how complex a project is. But at least with this one, I think this should be fast enough. So continuous integration pipeline. This is where we will set up the agent and the containers. For the block, one thing that's going to be important to us is, let me just, for a moment, excuse me for a moment. Okay, let me just go over my previous, sorry, let me just, okay, now we're editing it directly. Let's just wait for, all right. So the first block, now as we've seen, and listen to this one, we want to do the integration part. So one thing that might be interesting to you is to run code static analysis and testing, especially for testing, because now we don't want to revert any changes if they're already out for review in App Store or Google Play. So it's really important for us to actually run test. Let's first run setup. So I'm just pasting all the setup that I have here. We'll go over straight to them one by one, but not too deep. So at least with this one, with the first block, this is the first block that comprises the entire pipeline, in which, in this case, we are installing the dependencies of Flutter. These are all provided in the tutorial. And we have the context of jobs, meaning a single block can contain one or more jobs. And these jobs can run in parallel. But again, with this setup, we only have one job. So it doesn't make sense for us to create another job here. But if we will add the testing or the lint part, we can have two jobs. We can have a format code job and Flutter analyze command. So what we're doing here is we're running this commands here. So we're running the commands here, and we're just labeling them with this specific description for .job. And for the lint, it's almost similar. We're just naming the block. And dependencies is set up, meaning if this is failing, this will not run. So it's kind of like a requirement for this block to run. We also have jobs, and the difference with this one is we now have two jobs, which is actually cool because we can run both format and analyze code in parallel. We'll see this in action live in a few. And last but not least, if we want tests, all right. So you tests, and you can also run test code, right? And let's see, what else do we miss? All right, so I'm just putting in additional code here for caching, but definitely you can skip this part. But this is just for optimization for later. And that's pretty much it. After, 2 minutes, we already have continuous integration done without writing a code, just pasting a bunch of scripts that pretty much cache your workflow. And to run the workflow, click run the workflow here. And now let's see if it's working. So again, it depends on the machine. Right now I'm on a free plan, but if you're on a paid plan, that will be super sick. That will be super fast. So this one, the lint is running in parallel, as you can see here. Or at least with this one, we're on a free plan. That's why it's waiting for each other. But yeah, that should work fine. All right, let's just wait for it. Depending on the plan that you have, it's way more faster if you have it. Let's just wait for it. Test the code. So right now we only have one test for the counter app, which is just a widget test, whether the button is working after tapping the button. So the test should be fast, I suppose. And after a few seconds, that should wrap up our continuous integration phase. And yeah, I'll just wait for it. And voila, it's already done. Now with this specific setup alone, this will help you mitigate possible bugs, especially if you're writing good quality tests. Every time the push is changed or a push is made, this workflow will run depending on the setup. But at least by default, every time there's a push to a master, this workflow will run. If this fails, it means that the developer has to fix something even before the release has been made. So that's something that's going to be meaningful for mobile development, because instead of us trying to fix bugs or ship bugs, we're now able to fix them even before we try to submit them for review. So that saves time, and that saves a lot of possible back and forths with releases. Now, final steps is after running the continuous integration pipeline, we're just going to promote the build, meaning after running series of tests, we'll just promote the build to in terms of creating artifact. So the cool thing about Semaphore is it supports continuous deployment from out of the box, meaning after this one, you can now, let me just, you can now automatically do something. For example, if the branch that you've pushed to is master and the result is pass, you can now do something with this promotion. So you'll have a new pipeline, which is continuous deployment build artifact. All right. And with this, you can do something like, I'm sorry, let's just switch to Docker container as well. Copy Docker container. And we can just have prologue here. And the job is to build an APK. All right, so to build an APK. Right, so meaning if the continuous integration passes, this now has continuous deployment pipeline, which is building an artifact, which is going to be interesting because right now we have this build. Now, another one that you can do is after creating an artifact or archiving an artifact, you can deploy as well to Firebase, which is something that we want to do automatically as well. So enable promotion. Again, it's almost similar. If the result is pass, we want to deploy automatically to Firebase once we push to a master branch. And we'll have a job. Let me just explain this one by one, the things that I'm pasting. All right. So at least for build artifact, we're just creating an APK that we want to archive. But for deploy Firebase, every time this pipeline succeed, this will run continuous deployment Firebase. Meaning every time this integration passes and this Firebase run, we will call the Fastlane deploy. So imagine, remember earlier we have called Fastlane deploy. Right now it's just using bundle exec because the environment here is different, but it's still the same. And we're just basically installing the gem dependencies here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There's not much code here. Everything is in UI. If there's anything missing, probably just a couple of more series of integration tests here. But let's try. Let's try to do it here. All right, I think we'll finish in 2 minutes. Let's just wait for this one to finish. And yeah, we just have to wait for this one. And if we try to fetch it, right, so have 2 minutes. I think, yeah, we should just finish this one. note. All right, let's just wait for this to finish. So again, we haven't touched any code for this CI/CD example. We're just doing everything in the GUI, which Semaphore calls it Visual Builder. Semaphore Visual Builder. You can also manually run the deployment here manually, but that's something we don't want to do. Instead, we want to do it automatically. All right. So I think this should run. So one thing that we want to set up is start promotion. I think we can already run this. We're just trying to test if it's working. Because right now we're working on the setup semaphore branch. So you assume that this is all finished. We should now merge the branch setup semaphore to the master branch because remember this promotions will not automatically deploy to Firebase because the branch is setup semaphore. So git merge setup semaphore origin setup semaphore. So the semaphore that you have created or semaphore visual builder that you have created has now created this files. So imagine doing this everything manually. So with Semaphore, it automatically creates this files for you. This is a pipeline 2. And let's try to push a code. So let's stop this workflow. And all right, so this should fail. It's expected to fail. So there's just an error. Right, so that's just a simple issue with. Let me just double check it. But at least, at least that's pretty much it. If we try to leave this page, I think we will just have one error there. But if we want to push it, so this is already the continuous deployment. So once we push it to master, hit push origin master. You don't have to do anything manually. Refresh the page. Everything run for you. So that's automatically running. And if you try to click this, it should run this pipeline. So that's pretty much it. We haven't compared Semaphore, how it competes against its competitor GitHub Actions and Bitrise, but this is something that I recommend you guys trying out because, like, again, CI/CD doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather you will have to find what works best for your team. So it's kind of like a matter of experimentation, thorough research, what is efficient, what's not efficient, and eventually the tools that you will be using is just part of the bigger picture. What's most important is that you get to ship those features out to the users. Otherwise, the value is not going to be truly brought out from the engineering, like from the user's perspective. That's pretty much it for me. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer it. But since I think we've went over time, feel free to reach out to me.